The silent return Captain James Mitchell stood on the bridge of the research station New Horizon, staring at the most impossible sight of his 30-year career. The long-range sensors showed a fleet of unknown ships approaching Earth's solar system, but these vessels moved with a grace that defied conventional physics. How many? He asked his communications officer, Lisa Park. 47 ships, Captain. They're not responding to any of our hails. No radio signals, no quantum transmissions, nothing. They're completely silent. The ships were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Their hulls seemed to be made of living crystal that shifted between colors, and they moved through space without any visible propulsion systems. They were clearly advanced beyond anything humanity had ever built. Yet something about their design felt familiar. Dr. Robert Kane, the station's head scientist, ran scans on the approaching fleet with hands that trembled slightly. Captain, these energy signatures. I've never seen anything like them. But the quantum resonance patterns are showing something impossible. What do you mean? Impossible? Kane looked up from his instruments, his face pale. These ships are generating life signs that match human DNA patterns. Not similar to human, exactly human. President Maria Santos received the emergency briefing in the underground command center beneath Washington. The world's leaders had been watching the approaching fleet for 6 hours, and panic was starting to set in across the globe. Are we looking at an invasion? She asked General Tom Brooks, her military advisor. Unknown, Madam President. The ships haven't made any hostile moves, but they're also not responding to communication attempts. They're just coming home. Coming home? Brooks pulled up a holographic display showing the fleet's trajectory. They're heading directly for Earth, not toward our military installations, not toward our major cities. They're approaching like they belong here. The mysterious fleet entered Earth's atmosphere without slowing down, their crystalline hulls glowing softly as they passed through the air. They moved in perfect formation, completely silent, heading toward locations that seemed random to human observers. In the small town of Cedar Falls, Farmer Dan Wilson was feeding his cattle when the first ship landed in his back field. The vessel touched down without making a sound, its crystal surface reflecting the evening sunset. Dan stood frozen, waiting for something to happen. The ship's hull rippled like water, and a section dissolved to reveal an opening. A figure stepped out, and Dan's breath caught in his throat. It was human, definitely human. But there was something different about the person walking toward him. The stranger was tall and lean, with silver hair that seemed to move on its own, and eyes that held depths Dan had never seen in any human face. "Hello," the stranger said, and his voice carried harmonics that made Dan's bones vibrate. "My name is Alex. We have been away for a very long time." Similar scenes played out across the world. The ships landed in remote areas, small towns, and forgotten corners of civilization. Always quiet, always peaceful. The beings that emerged looked human, but carried themselves with an otherworldly grace that suggested they had seen things beyond Earth's sky. In the government command centers, confusion reigned. These visitors claimed to be human, and genetic scans confirmed it. But they spoke of being away, of traveling among the stars, of knowledge gained in the vast emptiness between worlds. Elena Rodriguez, Earth's leading anthropologist, was called in to interview one of the visitors who had landed near Mexico City. The being called himself Marcus, and he sat across from her with the patience of mountains. "How long have you been gone?" she asked. "By your measure of time, 300 of your years. By our experience, much longer. Time moves differently when you walk between the spaces of reality. But you're human. Our records show no missing colonization ships from 3 centuries ago." Marcus smiled, and the expression carried sadness that seemed to echo from the depths of space. We were not colonists, Dr. Rodriguez. We were the ones who chose to leave when humanity first reached for the stars. We were the ones who could not bear to watch our species repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Elena leaned forward. What mistakes? War, hatred, the destruction of beauty for the sake of temporary power. We left to find something better, to become something better. And we did. Across the world, the same story emerged from dozens of interviews. These were humans who had left Earth centuries ago, not in ships, but through methods they could not, or would not explain. They had traveled the galaxy, learned from alien civilizations, and evolved beyond what humanity had thought possible. But they had returned for a reason, and as the days passed, it became clear that their silence was not peaceful. It was the quiet of those who waited for something terrible to begin. The warning, 3 weeks after the silent landing, Marcus finally broke his people's code of quiet observation. Dr. Rodriguez was conducting her daily interview when Marcus suddenly stood up, his silver eyes reflecting light that seemed to come from within. Around the world, every one of the returned humans did the same thing at the exact same moment. "They are coming," Marcus said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the recording equipment vibrate. "The Devourers have found this system." "Who are the Devourers?" Rodriguez asked, but Marcus was already walking toward the window, staring up at the sky with an expression of deep concern. "We had hoped we were wrong. We had hoped our calculations were mistaken. But the quantum disturbances are clear now. They will arrive in 47 days. In Cedar Falls, Farmer Dan Wilson watched Alex perform what could only be called magic. The evolved human placed his hands on the ground, and the earth began to change. Metal structures rose from the soil like growing plants, forming complex patterns that hurt Dan's eyes to look at directly. "What are you building?" Dan asked. "Defenses," Alex replied without looking up. "Your people have no idea what is coming. The Devourers do not conquer worlds, they consume them. Every living thing, every drop of water, every breath of air. They turn entire star systems into empty void." President Santos called an emergency session of the United Nations. In the Great Assembly Hall, representatives from every nation on Earth listened as Marcus stood before them, his presence somehow commanding attention without effort. 300 years ago, we left Earth because we saw the signs," he began. "Humanity was spreading to the stars, but we also detected something else moving through the galaxy. A force of pure consumption that left only darkness behind." The hall was silent. Even the translators had stopped whispering. "We thought we could warn the galaxy, unite the species we encountered, build an alliance strong enough to stand against the Devourers. We spent centuries trying. We learned technologies beyond your current understanding. We evolved our bodies and minds to match the greatest civilizations in known space." Marcus paused, and for the first time since his arrival, he showed emotion. Pain flickered across his face like lightning. "We failed. 17 civilizations, each one older and more advanced than humanity, each one certain they could stand alone against the threat. One by one, the Devourers found them. One by one, entire species vanished into the void." General Brooks leaned forward. "How do we fight them?" "You cannot fight them," Marcus said simply. "Not as you are now. The Devourers are not a species. They are a force of nature. They consume matter itself and convert it into more of themselves. They have been growing for millions of years." "Then why did you come back?" President Santos asked. "If we cannot win, why return to Earth?" Marcus looked directly at her, and she saw something in his silver eyes that took her breath away. "Hope. Because we learned something in our travels that no other species possessed. We learned what makes humanity unique in the galaxy. You see, every other civilization we encountered had evolved beyond their primitive instincts. They had grown peaceful, logical, efficient. They had forgotten how to fight with desperate fury. "But humans remember," said Alex, speaking from 100 locations simultaneously, as all the returned humans shared their voice. "Humanity still carries the fire of survival that burned in your ancestors when they faced extinction with nothing but stone tools and stubborn will." Dr. Kane was studying the readings from the defensive structures the evolved humans were building. The technology was beyond anything Earth science could understand, but the energy patterns were familiar. "Captain Mitchell," he called out, "these devices, they're not just defensive. They're amplifiers." "Amplifiers for what?" Kane looked up from his instruments with wonder in his eyes. "For human potential. These structures are designed to enhance and focus human emotional and mental energy. Fear, anger, determination, love. They're turning human feelings into a weapon." Around the world, the returned humans continued their work. They built their strange structures in carefully calculated positions, creating a network that spanned the entire planet. As they worked, they finally began to explain their plan. The Devourers could not be defeated by technology alone. They had consumed civilizations far more advanced than Earth, but they had never faced a species that could transform raw emotion into reality-altering force. Humanity was about to learn that their greatest weakness, their chaotic, emotional, irrational nature, was actually their ultimate strength. And in 47 days, when the Devourers arrived expecting to find another quiet world to consume, they would instead discover something that had never existed before in the galaxy's history, a species that grew stronger when faced with impossible odds. The awakening, the first human to manifest the power, was a child. 8-year-old Tommy Chun was playing in his backyard in San Francisco when one of the amplifier structures activated nearby. His mother, Susan, watched in amazement as her son's emotions began to affect physical reality. Tommy had been crying because his pet hamster had died that morning. As his grief intensified near the crystalline structure that Alex had built in their neighborhood, the air around the boy began to shimmer. The dead hamster in the shoebox suddenly took a breath. "Mommy," Tommy whispered, tears streaming down. His face, Peanut, is moving. The hamster sat up, looked around, and began grooming itself as if nothing had happened. But its eyes now held a spark of intelligence that no earthly creature possessed. Dr. Rodriguez documented the incident and immediately called Marcus. She found him standing in the center of Mexico City's amplifier array, his silver hair flowing in winds that touched nothing else. "It's beginning," he said before she could speak. "The network is awakening human potential that has been dormant for millennia. Your species is remembering what it truly is." Similar incidents began occurring worldwide. In London, a street musician named David discovered that his emotions could make his guitar produce sounds that healed people's pain. In Tokyo, a factory worker named Akira found that his anger at injustice could reshape metal with his bare hands. In Cairo, a teacher named Fatima realized her love for her students could make them understand complex concepts instantly. But the most dramatic change was happening to ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Captain Mitchell received reports from around the globe as the amplifier network reached full power. Emergency responders were developing superhuman strength when lives were at stake. Doctors were healing patients through sheer determination. Parents were protecting their children with barriers of pure willpower that could stop speeding cars. "It's not random," Dr. Kane observed as he studied the data. "The stronger the emotion, the more powerful the effect. And it only works when people are trying to protect something or someone they care about." Marcus nodded when Kane shared his findings. "This is why we came home. Other species evolved beyond such feelings. They became logical, peaceful, but they lost the fire that burns in human hearts. The Devourers feed on matter and energy, but They cannot consume pure emotion given form. The world's military leaders were skeptical until they saw demonstrations. General Brooks watched in disbelief as Sergeant Lisa Park, motivated by thoughts of her young daughter, created a shield of golden light that deflected tank shells. The emotion-based defenses were not just powerful, they were adaptive, changing based on what the person needed most. "How do we train for this?" Brooks asked Marcus. "You cannot train emotion, General. You can only feel it. But you can teach people to focus their feelings, to direct them with purpose, rather than letting them scatter." Around the world, the returned humans began teaching their Earth-born cousins, not through textbooks or lectures, but through shared experience. They showed people how to find the deepest sources of human strength: love for family, determination to protect the innocent, rage at injustice, hope for the future. In Cedar Falls, Farmer Dan Wilson learned to channel his love for the land into growth patterns that could feed thousands. His fields began producing crops that grew in minutes instead of months, each plant carrying nutrients that could sustain human life indefinitely. "I don't understand how this works," Dan said to Alex, as they watched wheat grow in real time. "Understanding is not required," Alex replied. "Feeling is enough. You love this land, so the land responds to your love. The devourers understand only consumption. They will not know how to process a species that creates through emotion." President Santos established training centers in every major city, places where people could learn to harness their emotional potential. The military began developing new tactics based on feelings rather than firepower. Scientists studied the phenomenon and found that human consciousness itself was changing, becoming something that could interact with reality at the quantum level. But the most important discovery came from Dr. Rodriguez's continued interviews with the returned humans. "You've been preparing us," she realized during a conversation with Marcus. "For 3 centuries, you've been studying not just the devourers, but us. You've been waiting for the right moment when humanity would be ready to discover its true nature." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, the expression held no sadness. "Every war your species fought, every act of courage, in the face of impossible odds, every parent who died protecting their child, you have been training for this battle without knowing it. The devourers consume civilizations that have forgotten how to fight for something greater than themselves." He looked up at the sky, where distant stars were beginning to dim as the approaching enemy drew closer. "They have never faced a species where a mother's love can stop their advance, where a soldier's duty can shield entire cities, where the simple human refusal to give up can turn the tide of cosmic war." With 23 days until the devourers arrived, humanity was finally beginning to roar. The storm arrives, the devourers came in silence, just as they had consumed 17 civilizations before. Captain Mitchell watched from the new horizon as space itself began to change. Stars winked out one by one, not exploding or collapsing, but simply ceasing to exist. The void that approached Earth was not darkness. It was the complete absence of everything. "My God," whispered Dr. Kane. "They're not just destroying matter. They're unmaking reality itself." The first devourer ship materialized at the edge of the solar system, and every human on Earth felt it like ice water in their veins. It was not a vessel in any recognizable sense. It was a wound in space, a tear in the fabric of existence that hurt to perceive. Through that wound, something vast and hungry pressed against the barriers of the real world. Marcus stood in Times Square, surrounded by thousands of humans who had come to witness the final battle. The amplifier structures throughout the city hummed with power as human emotions reached levels that registered on quantum sensors around the globe. "Remember," Marcus called out, his voice somehow reaching every person on Earth simultaneously. "They feed on matter and energy, but they starve on hope. They consume worlds, but they cannot devour the human spirit. Today, we show the galaxy what our species truly is. The first wave of devourers swept through the outer planets like a tide of nothingness. Mars vanished first, simply erased from existence, as if it had never been. Then the asteroid belt dissolved into void. Jupiter lasted 3 minutes before. Its massive bulk was consumed and transformed into more devourers. But as the enemy approached Earth, they encountered something no previous civilization had possessed. Sergeant Lisa Park stood on the roof of the Pentagon, her daughter Emily's photograph clutched in her hands. Around her, soldiers from every nation on Earth had joined together, their combined emotions creating a barrier of light that stretched from ground to stratosphere. "For our children," Lisa whispered, and her words became a battle cry that echoed. Across continents, the first devourer to strike Earth's atmosphere met that barrier and recoiled. For the first time in millions of years of existence, it encountered something it could not consume. The pure emotional energy that humans were generating did not just resist the creature's hunger, it actively heard it dot in hospitals worldwide. Doctors and nurses channeling their determination to heal created zones where the devourers, reality unmaking powers, simply failed to function. In schools, teachers protecting their students generated fields of knowledge and hope that the creatures found impossible to process. On farms like Dan Wilson's, the love of the land created pockets of growth that countered the devourer's consumption. But the enemy adapted quickly. More devourers poured through the void, surrounding Earth in a sphere of hungry darkness. They began to probe the emotional defenses, looking for weaknesses, testing different approaches. President Santos coordinated the global defense from her command center, but the real battle was being fought by ordinary people in their own neighborhoods. The amplifier network allowed human emotions to reach unprecedented levels of power, but it required genuine feeling. No one could fake the love, courage, or determination needed to hold back cosmic horror that 8-year-old Tommy played with his resurrected hamster Peanut in his backyard, his innocent joy creating a bubble of pure life that devourers found toxic to approach. His mother Susan watched in amazement as flowers bloomed instantly around her son, and the very air seemed to sparkle with possibility. ****. The children are our strongest defenders, Dr. Rodriguez observed as she monitored the global situation. Their emotions are pure, undiluted by adult cynicism. When a child believes something is possible, reality itself seems to agree. Marcus stood at the center of the human defense network, his evolved abilities allowing him to coordinate with every amplifier structure simultaneously. Through his connection, he could feel the emotions of 8 billion humans all focused on a single purpose, protecting their home, their families, their future. "Now," he said, and his voice carried across every communication device on Earth. "Now we show them what happens when humanity stops being quiet." The roar began in Times Square and spread across the world in seconds. Not a sound, but an expression of pure human defiance that shook reality itself. Every person who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to surrender, every parent who had protected their child against overwhelming force, every soldier who had stood their ground when retreat was the logical choice, all of that accumulated. Human stubbornness and courage erupted simultaneously. A wave of raw human determination struck the devourer fleet like a tsunami of light. For creatures that had never encountered resistance they could not simply consume, the experience was devastating. They had devoured civilizations that fought with logic and technology. But humans fought with something far more dangerous: the absolute refusal to accept defeat when something they loved was threatened. The real war had begun, and the devourers were learning that some things in the universe were harder to swallow than others. The children's victory. The battle lasted 7 days, but it was the 7th hour of the 7th day when everything changed. Tommy was playing in his garden when he made a discovery that would save the galaxy. His hamster Peanut, resurrected by pure love and now glowing with an inner light, had begun to do something impossible. The small creature was healing the void itself, filling the empty spaces where the devourers had unmade reality. "Look, Mommy," Tommy called to Susan. "Peanut is fixing the sky." Susan looked up to see stars reappearing in places where only darkness had existed moments before. Her son's simple joy at his pet's recovery was literally recreating destroyed worlds. The boy's innocent belief that things could be made better was becoming universal. Dr. Rodriguez documented the phenomenon from her monitoring station. "Marcus, the children aren't just defending against the devourers. They're reversing their damage. Every act of creation, every moment of pure happiness, it's restoring what was consumed." Marcus stood in the center of the global amplifier network, Silver, tears flowing down his face as he felt what was happening. "We never imagined this possibility. We thought we could only resist them. But human children, their emotions don't just reject destruction. They demand creation." Asterisk around the world, the pattern repeated. In London, young Emma drew pictures of her grandfather who had died the year before, and her love brought him back to life in the nursing home where he had passed. In Brazil, Carlos played soccer with his friends, and their laughter restored entire forests that the devourers had consumed. In India, Priya sang lullabies to her baby brother, and her tenderness recreated 3 solar systems that had been erased from existence. The devourers, ancient beyond measure and experienced in consuming entire galactic civilizations, found themselves facing something they had no evolutionary response to: the creative power of human imagination fueled by pure emotion. Captain Mitchell watched from the new horizon as the impossible unfolded before him. "Dr. Kane, are you seeing this? The children aren't just stopping the devourers. They're making them ... change." The creatures that had been wounds in reality were beginning to seal themselves, not dying, but transforming. The void beings that had consumed matter for millions of years were being overwhelmed by human creativity and starting to create instead of destroy. President Santos received reports from around the globe that defied every law of physics she knew. "General Brooks, tell me what you're seeing out there." "Madam President, our children have turned the enemy into gardeners. The devourers are now building things, growing things. One of them just helped a little girl in Kansas plant flowers. The transformation was spreading through the enemy fleet like a virus of hope. Each devourer that encountered pure human emotion began to remember what creation felt like. They had consumed so many civilizations, absorbed so many different forms of life, that somewhere deep in their collective memory, they still carried echoes of every species they had devoured. But human children's emotions were teaching them to access those memories differently. Marcus felt the shift in the cosmic balance and called out to every human on Earth through the amplifier network. "They are changing because you refuse to. Let them remain as they are." Human compassion does not just protect, it heals, even ancient wounds, even cosmic hunger, even creatures that have forgotten how to be anything but emptiness. 8-year-old Tommy walked up to the nearest transformed devourer, which had taken the shape of a giant crystal butterfly. The creature that had once unmade entire star systems now hovered gently, its wings scattering seeds of new worlds wherever they touched the void. "Are you sad?" Tommy asked the butterfly. The creature's response came not in words, but in pure emotion that every human on Earth could feel. Eons of loneliness, millions of years of hunger that could never be satisfied, the desperate need to consume because creation had been forgotten so long ago. Tommy reached up and patted one of the butterfly's crystalline wings. "It's okay. Mommy says everyone can learn to be happy again." That touch, filled with the child's absolute certainty that everything could be made better, completed the transformation, not just of that single devourer, but of the entire species. Across the galaxy, creatures that had been cosmic horror for millions of years suddenly remembered joy. The war was over, but the real victory was just beginning. The transformed devourers spread across the galaxy, not to consume but to restore. Every civilization they had destroyed began to reappear, rebuilt from the memories and emotions they had unknowingly preserved. 17 species that had been erased from existence found themselves alive again, standing on worlds that bloomed with impossible beauty. And at the center of it all, humanity took its place not as conquerors, but as teachers. The lost children of Earth had returned with advanced knowledge, but it was the Earth-born children who had shown the galaxy its most important lesson. That love, properly focused, could heal any wound and transform any darkness into light. Silence was finally broken, and the sound that emerged was not a roar of war, but the laughter of children who believed the universe could be made better simply by caring enough to try.